The morning cold at Rollins Station bit through wool and leather alike. Wyoming Territory. 1891, the wind carried the sound of frozen earth groaning beneath iron rails. Snow crusted the wooden steps leading down from the platform, and the schedule board trembled in the gusts like a thing alive. Nora Vance stepped down from the last car, her gloved hand gripping the handle of a worn trunk, the other clutching a letter she'd memorized weeks ago. Her heart kept time with the cooling metal of the locomotive. Each beat a question she couldn't voice aloud. Royce Mercer emerged from behind a stack of timber crates. His coat was clean, his mustache trimmed neat, his eyes taking inventory quick at first, then slow, measuring age against expectation and finding the scales tipped wrong. The conversation lasted no longer than frost on a stove. "I thought you'd be younger," he said, not meeting her gaze. "I'm 58, and I arrived on time." Her voice held steady as the rails beneath their feet. "I want children." The words fell between them like stones. "You wrote clear enough about everything except what you were thinking." She kept her chin level, though the cold seemed to reach past her coat now. Royce turned away without looking back. No apology could warm the north wind anyway. The train shrieked and pulled away from the station, leaving a gap like a pulled tooth in the morning air. The station agent pointed to the schedule when she asked about eastbound trains. Not till Thursday, if the weather holds. He suggested leaving her trunk in storage. Nora shook her head and hefted it herself, a habit born from years of managing alone. She walked through the main street, the general store with its painted sign, the church with its lonesome bell. Curious eyes behind curtained windows, a western town that didn't greet or chase away, just watched and waited. Shame and anger mixed like bad whiskey in her stomach. Memories of other times she'd been left behind surfaced unbidden, but she straightened her torn glove and kept walking. The snow crunched beneath her boots, each step a small declaration. Gideon Blake stood outside the livery stable, tall and lean as winter grass, his coat draped over broad shoulders. He didn't smile, but his voice held no ice when he spoke. "You're carrying more than what you packed." "Help or judgment?" she asked, direct as a telegraph. "Help doesn't come with strings attached. Judgment's for folks who can't mind their own doorstep." Gideon offered his wagon. Nora weighed the offer for a long moment, then nodded once, a concession that cost no dignity. They left town with wheels grinding through snow, pine trees standing silent sentinel. The quiet scraped away useless questions, leaving only what needed hearing. The mountains rose around them like walls built by patient hands. On the road, Nora named the truth plain. "I came west looking for honesty." He knew, but chose to dodge it. Knowing and dodging anyway, that's worse. Gideon's response came measured as fence posts. The afternoon shadows swallowed the rocky ridges. A low roof appeared, chimney breathing steady smoke. Her trunk found a place beside the stove, no questions asked, no pity offered, just space made without fuss. That first night, the smell of pine sap and coffee grounds, wind rattling the walls like a visitor denied entry. Two chairs sat across from each other, neither person needing to prove they belonged in the room. The stove crackled between them, casting dancing shadows that seemed to soften the edges of the day. Gideon poured coffee black as the night outside. "Storms coming in harder, could last days." "I've weathered storms before." Nora wrapped her hands around the tin cup, letting the heat seep through. "Different kind of storm out here, the kind that makes you grateful for walls and a roof, no matter whose they are." She studied him over the rim of her cup. Lines mapped his face like trails across the territory, each one earned, not inherited. His hands showed the calluses of honest work, the kind that built rather than took. "Why offer help to a stranger?" she asked. "Maybe because strangers are just folks who haven't shared a fire yet." He refilled both cups without ceremony. "Besides, I know what it's like to stand in a train station with plans changed by someone else's choosing." The wind picked up outside, howling through the gaps like gossip through a small town. But inside, the quiet held different quality, not empty. but full of possibility. "I'll work for my keep," Nora said. "I don't take charity." "Didn't offer any. Ranch needs tending. I need someone who can read and figure. The books are a mess, and my eyes aren't what they were." It was a practical arrangement, laid out simple as a surveyor's line, but underneath ran something else: recognition. Maybe two people who'd learned to stand alone, finding they could stand near each other without losing balance. As the night deepened, Gideon showed her to a small room off the kitchen. "Was my mother's sewing room. Hasn't been used proper in years, but the roof's sound and the walls keep the wind out." The room held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window facing east. Nora set her trunk at the foot of the bed, finally letting go of the handle she'd gripped since morning. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the room. Gideon nodded and turned to go, then paused at the door. "Coffee's on at sunrise. Earlier if the wind keeps up." Alone, Nora unpacked slowly. Each item found its place: clothes in the small dresser, her few books on the windowsill. The letter from Royce crumpled and tossed into the stove's flames. She watched it curl and blacken, taking with it the plans that had brought her here but not the person she'd always been. The wind continued its assault on the walls, but the house stood firm. In the main room, she could hear Gideon banking the fire for the night, the careful movements of a man who'd learned to be alone without being lonely. She lay down fully dressed except for her boots, pulling a thick quilt up to her chin. The pillow smelled of lavender and aged someone else's memory becoming her present circumstance. Outside, the Wyoming winter raged on, indifferent to human plans or disappointments. But inside these walls, warmth held steady. Not the warmth of romance or rescued dreams, but something more solid: the warmth of finding ground that didn't shift beneath your feet, even when everything else had changed between morning and night. Sleep came slowly, bringing with it not dreams of what might have been, but the simple relief of having survived another leaving, another arrival, another day of choosing to keep moving forward when standing still would have been easier. In the morning, true to his word, the smell of coffee would wake her before the sun, and with it would come the first day of a life she hadn't planned but might learn to choose. One chore, one conversation, one shared meal at a time. The house creaked and settled around her like a living thing learning her weight. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks that had brought her here, making all paths forward equally new and possible. 3 sharp knocks cut through the snow-muffled night. Gideon reached for his rifle with the instinct of a man who'd lived on frontier edges, where unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Jed Carver stepped inside when the door opened, his coat dripping melting snow, eyes darting quick as a cornered animal's, his smile stretched thin as wire. "Just need a spot by the fire for the night. Friend, storm caught me between towns." Gideon lowered the rifle, but kept it close. "You can have floor space near the stove. Hands stay where I can see them." Nora remained silent in her chair, but her hand rested casual-like near the flour tin where she'd noticed an old pistol tucked behind it earlier that day. She'd learned long ago that silence often told more truth than words. Jed assessed the room with practiced ease: the trunk, the 2 chairs, the careful distance between them. "Married folks?" he asked, voice sweet as spoiled molasses. "You assume too much," Nora replied, her tone flat as day-old bread. The night stretched like taffy. Jed's breathing came too quick for real sleep, too measured for waking. Nora caught Gideon's eye and whispered, "He's not sleeping." Gideon nodded, confirming what his war-trained senses already knew. He'd seen men like this before, the kind who wore friendship like a mask over worse intentions. Knew someone like him once, during the war, man who'd sell his mother's grave plot for drinking money. When dawn finally grayed the windows, Jed sprang up too quick, all false cheer and hollow gratitude. He made a move toward Gideon's rifle leaning against the wall, casual-like, as if admiring the wood grain. Gideon's hand shot out, shoving him back against the wall, hard enough to rattle the dishes. "That's close enough." The knife appeared in Jed's hand like a magic trick gone wrong, blade catching the weak morning light. But Nora had already risen from her chair, movements deliberate as a clock's mechanism. The pistol in her hand pointed steady at his chest. "Put it down," she said, voice carrying the weight of someone who'd faced down worse than barn rats. Jed's laugh came out forced. "You won't shoot, lady. Not the type." "I've buried men who thought they knew my type." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. "Some deserved it less than you." The knife clattered to the floor. Gideon kicked it away and opened the door to the cutting cold. "You want to keep breathing. You'll start walking and keep walking till you hit the next county." Jed slunk out into the storm, throwing one last look over his shoulder, a promise of trouble deferred, not forgotten. The door slammed shut behind him, and the house seemed to exhale. Nora set the pistol back behind the flour tin with steady hands. Gideon watched her move about the kitchen, starting coffee, slicing bread, as if armed standoffs were common as sunrise. The room found its rhythm again, heartbeat by heartbeat. "Where'd you learn to handle a pistol?" he asked finally. "My late husband taught me. Said a woman alone needed more than good intentions for protection." She poured coffee without looking up. He was right about that, if not much else. They didn't speak more about the night's events. Some things settled better in silence, like sediment in troubled water. But something had shifted between them, a border crossed, a trust earned in the space between danger and safety. The morning after the storm broke clear and cold, skies sharp as broken glass. They hung bedding out to air. The simple domestic task made somehow significant by what they'd weathered together. The mountains stood white and implacable in the distance, witnesses to all the small human dramas played out in their shadows. Nora began reorganizing the kitchen with quiet efficiency. She fixed a loose cabinet hinge, patched a gap where wind whistled through, arranged the shelves so things made sense. Small changes, but the kind that spoke of staying rather than passing through. Gideon worked on the fence rails, replacing sections worn weak by weather and time. He found himself working closer to the house than usual, ear tuned to the sounds from within the scrape of a chair, the clatter of dishes, the low humming of a half-remembered tune. At midday, she brought him coffee, black and strong. Their hands brushed as she passed the cup, and neither pulled away quick like they might have days ago. "I've been thinking," Gideon said, testing the words careful-like. "That back room's yours as long as you want it. Not charity." He added quickly, "You're earning it. Books are already making more sense, and that's worth something."
"I've been thinking too," Nora replied. "This place could use some chickens, maybe a garden come spring,
if you're amenable." "Amenable," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "I suppose I am." They stood there in the bright, cold day, looking out at the land that asked everything and promised nothing except what you could scratch from it with work and will. The rifle leaned against the fence post between them, reminder of the night's darkness, but also of their ability to face it together. That evening, Gideon pulled out a second chair he'd been meaning to fix, set it by the stove next to his own.
"Seems foolish, you dragging that other chair over every night."
Nora smiled, first real smile he'd seen from her. It changed her face, made the years sit lighter on it. "Suppose it does." They settled into the evening like horses into familiar stalls. Gideon whittled at a piece of pine, shaving curling to the floor like tiny scrolls. Nora worked on mending a shirt, her stitches small and precise, the companionable silence wrapped around them warm as any blanket. "Never thanked you proper," Gideon said suddenly. "For this morning, for being ready." "No thanks needed. We were both ready. That's what matters." She kept her eyes on her sewing. "Though I'd appreciate knowing if you expect more visitors of that type. Jed's like a bad penny shows up where there's opportunity for taking, but he's learned this isn't the place for it." He paused, considering. "You really bury men before—"
"One."
her needle never paused. "My husband, fever took him 2 winters back, but Jed didn't need to know that. Fear serves better than truth sometimes." Gideon nodded, understanding the economy of frontier justice, where reputation could be currency and the threat of violence often prevented its necessity. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the white expanse, their voices threading through the darkness like needles through cloth. Inside, the stove crackled and settled, marking time in its own quiet way. The house that had seemed too large for one now felt right-sized for 2. Each person filling spaces the other had left empty. As the night deepened, they moved about their evening routines with the careful choreography of people learning to share space without colliding. Small courtesies observed, small allowances made, the foundation of something that might, given time and patience, grow into more than mere convenience. When Nora finally bid him good night and retreated to her room, Gideon sat alone for a moment longer. The house felt different now, not empty, but waiting, like ground prepared for planting, ready for whatever might take root. The days after the storm settled into clear routine feeding stock, chopping wood, checking water troughs. Nora folded herself into the ranch's rhythm like she'd always belonged there, finding work that needed doing before being asked. She spread Gideon's account books across the kitchen table, squinting at his cramped handwriting. The numbers told a story of slow-loss cattle unaccounted for since last spring, expenses creeping higher than income. "You're missing 6 head from the April count," she said, marking the ledger with precise notation. "Figured they wandered off. Maybe wolves got them." Gideon leaned over her shoulder, close enough she could smell wood smoke and leather on him. "Maybe, but the pattern's strange. Lost cattle all from the south pasture. None from the north where the wolves den." She tapped the page. "Might be worth checking brands at the stockyard come market day." They spent the afternoon stringing new wire along the southern fence line. Nora held posts steady while Gideon hammered, their movements finding easy synchronization. "Post is crooked," she observed. "Ground's crooked. Fix one thing, the other gets worse. Still worth fixing." His hammer rang against the metal, punctuating the words. The work was hard but satisfying, the kind that showed immediate results. By sunset, 1/4 mile of fence stood straighter than before, ready to hold against whatever pressed against it. In town, their appearances together drew long looks and low whispers. The shopkeeper served them with professional courtesy, but no warmth. Comments drifted like smoke. His age, her circumstances, won't last the winter. Gideon's jaw tightened at the gossip, but Nora touched his arm lightly. "Let them talk. Wine through a fence makes noise but changes nothing." At the mercantile, she selected supplies with careful economy while Gideon loaded feed sacks. The proprietor's wife watched from behind the counter, curiosity winning over propriety. "You're the woman from the train station," she said, not quite a question. "I am." Nora counted out coins exact. "Staying long as it takes." The ambiguity hung in the air like morning mist. Nora collected her purchases and left the woman to puzzle over the meaning. That evening, Gideon brought up the town dance scheduled for Saturday. "I'm no hand at dancing, but I go to show face, keep peace with the neighbors." Nora considered while darning a sock. "Been years since I danced. Might be good to remind them you're not going anywhere." She looked up then, studying his face in the lamplight. "Is that what you want, for me not to go anywhere?" The question sat between them like a third presence at the table. Gideon shifted in his chair, unused to putting feelings into words. "Ranch runs better with 2, books balance, coffee tastes right." He paused, searching. "House doesn't echo so much." It wasn't poetry, but it was truth. Nora nodded slowly. "Then I'll need to air out my good dress." In the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a dress of deep burgundy wool. Not fashionable by Eastern standards, but respectable. She'd packed it out of habit more than hope. the gesture of a woman who'd learned to prepare for occasions that might never come. She found Gideon's mother's silver-backed brush in a drawer and worked it through her gray-streaked hair. In the small mirror, she saw not the young woman she'd been, but the woman she'd become, weathered but not broken, aged but not defeated. The afternoon before the dance, she discovered a small lavender sachet tucked in the trunk's corner, her mother's, kept all these years. The scent had faded to ghost of memory, but she pinned it inside her collar anyway. Some traditions deserved keeping, even when everything else had changed. Gideon appeared in the doorway, clean-shaven and wearing a shirt she'd pressed that morning. "You look," he started, then stopped, as if the right words were cattle that had wandered out of reach.
"Like a woman going to a dance?"
she supplied, saving him the struggle. "Better than that." He offered his arm, formal as any Eastern gentleman, ready to scandalize the good people of Rollins. "I've been ready since I stepped off that train." The walk to town felt different in evening clothes, their breath clouding white in the cold air. Other couples passed them heading the same direction, some nodding greeting, others pretending not to see. Gideon's arm stayed steady under her hand. The dance hall glowed with kerosene lamps, fiddle music spilling out into the night. When they entered, the music didn't stop, but conversations stuttered like engines missing a gear. Eyes tracked their progress to the punch bowl, measuring and judging.
"Let them look,"
Nora murmured. "We're more interesting than whatever they were discussing before." They stood at the edge of the dancing, watching younger couples whirl past. Then the fiddler struck up a slower tune, something old and sweet. Gideon turned to her, a question in his eyes. "I warned you I was no dancer," he said. "And I warned you it's been years. We're well matched in our shortcomings." They moved onto the floor with careful steps, finding their way into the music's rhythm. Gideon's hand at her waist was steady, respectful. Nora let him lead, something she'd never found easy, but which felt natural now. Whispers followed their circuit of the floor. "Too old for such foolishness. What's he thinking? What's she after?" Nora smiled up at Gideon. "They're working hard tonight."
"Let them. I'm dancing with the most interesting woman in Wyoming territory."
"Interesting. That's one word for it." "Right word," he said firmly. "You're not here to be young or pretty or convenient. You're here to be yourself. That's interesting enough for me." They danced 2 more songs before the stairs grew too heavy, made their courtesies to the minister and his wife, collected their coats, and stepped back into the clean, cold night, walking home under stars sharp as glass shards. Nora felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of guards she'd held so long she'd forgotten they were there. Beside her, Gideon hummed the last tune they danced to, off-key but content.
"Thank you,"
she said as they reached the ranch house. "For what?" "For not trying to make me someone I'm not." He helped her with her coat, hands lingering just a moment on her shoulders. "Wouldn't know how to try. Seems like wasted effort when who you are suits fine." Inside, he made coffee while she changed back into everyday clothes. They sat in their accustomed chairs, but something had changed. The space between them felt charged with possibility, like air before lightning. "People will talk more now," Nora said. "People always talk. Question is whether we listen." She sipped her coffee, considering, "I stopped listening to what people said about me years ago. Had to, or I'd have never left Missouri." "Why did you leave?" It was the first truly personal question he'd asked. "Same reason anyone comes west, looking for something I couldn't find where I was." She paused. "Thought I'd found it in those letters from Royce. Turns out I was looking in the wrong place." "Maybe you were looking for the right thing in the wrong place," Gideon suggested. "Happens to all of us." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing on the walls. Outside, an owl called, the sound lonely and wild. Inside, 2 people sat in comfortable silence, no longer strangers, Not yet more than friends, but traveling that direction steady as sunrise. Winter stretched on like a long-winded preacher, testing faith and patience alike. Wolf tracks appeared near the pasture edges, and Nora and Gideon took turns watching the herd through bitter nights. The dogs barked themselves hoarse, their warning sharp as broken glass in the darkness. "We need to lay in better stores," Nora suggested one morning, studying their dwindling supplies. "Dried beans, salt pork, cornmeal. Hunger comes unexpected as thieves out here." They made the trip to town together, purchasing nails, wire, and seed for spring planting. The stares had shifted from hostile to curious, like cattle getting used to a new fence line. Mrs. Henderson at the feed store added an extra packet of salt for the goats you used to keep.
How did she know about my goats?
Nora asked as they loaded the wagon. Small towns have long memories. Gideon replied, "Sometimes that works against you, sometimes for you." Royce Mercer appeared outside the bank, nearly colliding with them on the boardwalk. His eyes skittered away like spooked mice, then back, as if magnetized by guilt. He stammered through pleasantries that fooled no one. "I hope you're well, Mrs. He faltered on the title. "Well enough," Nora replied evenly.
"Good day to you, Mr. Mercer."
She walked on without waiting for response. Gideon beside her. The victory lay not in harsh words, but in needing none. Royce stood behind them like yesterday's news, already fading. Back at the ranch, they found official notice posted on the gate. The county commissioners had redrawn water rights boundaries. The stream that fed Gideon's south pasture now fell into disputed territory. Nora examined the old deed papers by lamplight, tracing faded ink with careful fingers. The original survey markers are vague. Says, "From the large oak to the rock shaped like a buffalo." Could mean anything after 40 years. Never needed papers before. A man's word used to be enough. Gideon's frustration showed in the set of his shoulders. Times change. We need to document everything: survey markers, water flow, usage dates, make a case they can't dismiss. She pulled out fresh paper. "I'll write to the county clerk. Request the original survey records." Gideon watched her work, precise lettering filling the page. "You've done this before." "Had to fight for my husband's pension after he died. Learned that officials respond better to paper than pleas." She blotted the ink carefully. "We'll need the magistrate as witness when we mark the boundaries." The drought came early, snow melting too fast, streams running thin as promises. They dammed a section of creek to create a holding pond, hauling rocks until their backs screamed protest. The work was brutal, but necessary water meant life in this country. "Never seen it this dry this early," Gideon said, wiping sweat despite the cool air. "Then we'd better prepare for worse." Nora suggested rotating pastures, drilling a test well near the house. Investment now saves suffering later. They spent a week digging, hands blistering despite thick gloves. Each bucket of earth felt like prayer, each foot deeper an act of faith. When water finally seeped in, brown and sluggish but real, Nora actually laughed first time Gideon had heard the sound from her. News of cattle thieves working the area added another worry. Strange hoof prints appeared near the south fence, leading toward the canyon where Jed had vanished. The name became a shadow over their days. Unspoken, but present. "Could be anybody," Gideon said, but his hand checked his rifle more often. "Could be." Nora agreed, but she moved the old pistol from behind the flour to under her pillow. They reported the tracks to Sheriff Watson, a man spread too thin over too much territory. He promised to investigate when he could, which meant little, and they knew it. "We're on our own." Nora stated the obvious as they rode home. "Always have been. At least now there's two of us being on our own together." One night, sounds of disturbance sent them both outside, cracking branches. Spooked cattle, dogs snarling at shadows. Gideon fired a warning shot while Nora called out. Voice carrying authority learned somewhere harder than here. The cattle scattered but stayed on their land. In the morning, they found a dropped knife, its handle carved with familiar notches. "Jed's work," Gideon said grimly. "Then Jed's problem now," Nora replied, pocketing the knife as evidence. The next day brought unexpected visitors, Royce seeking redemption through information. "Heard talk at the saloon. Men planning something involving the canyon routes? Thought you should know." Gideon thanked him stiffly, maintaining the careful distance of forgiveness without forgetting. After Royce left, Nora said, "Guilt makes some men dangerous and others useful." "Which kind is he?" "Jury's still out, but information's information, wherever it comes from." They reinforced their night watch, added simple alarm lines across the likely approaches, just rope and cans. But enough to warn of visitors. Frontier security built from scraps and vigilance. A dust storm struck without warning. Red earth scouring paint from wood, turning day to dirty twilight. They fought to keep stock contained. Faces wrapped in wet cloth, eyes stinging blind. The land showed its temper in ways beyond cold, reminding them that winter was just one face of hardship. After the storm, dead trees littered the landscape like scattered bones. The water ran rust-colored with runoff. Nora filtered it through sand and charcoal. Knowledge gleaned from years of making do. Clean water's worth more than gold out here. Town meeting convened to address the water disputes. Neighbors downstream accused Gideon of damming more than his share. Nora arrived with detailed logs dates, measurements, rainfall records she'd kept through the season. Facts arranged like ammunition against accusation. "Numbers don't lie," she said, presenting her evidence to the commission. "We take what we're entitled to, no more." The chairman, impressed despite himself by her thoroughness, scheduled formal hearings. As they left, Gideon admitted, "I freeze up in front of crowds, always have. Then I'll do the talking. You just stand there looking honest." She touched his arm lightly. "We're partners. That means using each other's strengths." The night before the hearing, horses approached their property. The alarm lines rattled warning. 2 shadows circled the water barriers, testing for weaknesses. Gideon and Nora waited, weapons ready but not eager. The shadows retreated without forcing confrontation. "Smart choice," Nora murmured. "For them and us both," Gideon agreed. Maturity meant knowing when not to fight as much as when to stand ground. Dawn came red as warning, vultures circling something distant. The land itself seemed to watch, waiting to see who would last and who would break. Survival meant more than guns and grit. It meant papers filed proper, water shared fair, and sometimes having someone beside you who understood both bullets and bookkeeping. That evening, Gideon placed a small box on the table. Inside lay an old daguerreotype, a woman in dated dress, kind eyes above a determined chin. "My mother," he said. "You remind me of her, not in looks, but in spine." Nora studied the image carefully. "She looks like someone who knew her mind." "She did. Would have liked you, I think. Even though I showed up uninvited and stayed longer than planned. Especially because of that. She always said the best things in life came sideways, not straight on." They sat quietly as stars emerged, each lost in thoughts of mothers and choices, paths taken and abandoned. Tomorrow would bring the hearing, new challenges, more fights for water and respect. But tonight, they had coffee, companionship, and the peculiar comfort of finding home in unexpected places. The box with the photograph stayed on the table between them, a bridge between past and present, between the family Gideon had lost and whatever they were building, now unnamed but undeniable, growing stronger with each shared sunrise and survived storm. Bad news traveled fast as wildfire through dry grass. Cattle thieves had struck 3 ranches in the valley, leaving behind empty pastures and desperate families. The tracks all led toward the canyon country, where shadows swallowed truth and law alike. Fresh hoofprints appeared along Gideon's southern fence, too many to be casual passing. The marks led straight toward the box canyon where Jed had vanished months ago. His name hung unspoken between them, heavy as storm clouds.
Same shoe pattern on the left front, Nora observed. Kneeling beside the tracks. Same horse that's been scouting us.
They reported to Sheriff Watson, who looked older than his years, worn down by too much territory and too few deputies. I'll do what I can, but you folks need to watch yourselves. These aren't amateurs. That night, they took turns standing watch. The dogs stayed restless, hackles raised at every shifting shadow. Near dawn, sounds drifted across the pasture, cattle lowing, leather creaking, metal jingling soft as whispers. Gideon fired his rifle skyward while Nora shouted clear and strong, "County law's been notified, best move on while you can." Shapes scattered like startled crows. Come morning, they found the gate forced but the cattle still there, milling nervous but uncounted. A knife lay dropped in the dust, same carved handle, same familiar notches. "He's getting bold," Gideon said, turning the blade over. "Or desperate. Desperate men make mistakes." Nora wrapped the knife in cloth. Evidence for the sheriff. 2 days later, Royce appeared at their gate, hat in hand like a penitent. "I know I've no right to your time, but I heard something you need to know." Gideon's expression stayed neutral as fence posts. "Speak your piece." "Jed Carver's been drinking heavy at Murphy's, bragging about big plans, easy money. Mentioned your place specific." Royce shifted his weight, uncomfortable with doing right after doing wrong. "Thought you should know." "Appreciate the warning," Nora said when Gideon stayed silent. Sometimes accepting help meant swallowing pride like bitter medicine. After Royce left, they reinforced their defenses. Simple things, bells on wires, boards with nails across likely paths, not meant to kill, just to warn and slow. "Feels like preparing for war," Gideon muttered. "It is war, of a kind. The kind where staying smart matters more than shooting straight." Nora checked the loads in her pistol. Though shooting straight doesn't hurt. The dust storm hit without warning, red earth rising like a wall of anger. They fought to secure everything loose. Bandanas wrapped across faces, eyes streaming tears that turned to mud. The world disappeared in a howling brown void that seemed to last forever. When it finally passed, the landscape looked scoured and strange. Trees stood naked, stripped of leaves. The water in the creek ran thick with silt. Dead birds littered the ground like fallen messages. "Never seen one that bad," Gideon said, surveying the damage. "Land's angry about something." Nora began the slow work of filtering water through sand and cloth. Or maybe just reminding us who's really in charge. Town meeting convened in the church. Voices raised loud about water rights. Downstream neighbors accused Gideon of theft, their words sharp with drought fear. Nora stood with her ledger. Every measurement recorded, every date noted. The creek dropped 3 inches after the Hendersons dug their new channel, she read. 4 inches after the Millers extended their dam. Mr. Blake took his legal share, no more. The commissioners studied her documentation, impressed despite themselves. Order in the chaos, facts against fear. They scheduled formal hearings, promising fair consideration. Walking out, misses. Henderson caught Nora's sleeve. That was brave, speaking up like that. Wasn't brave, was necessary. There's a difference. Maybe, but it looked brave from where I stood. That night, warning bells jangled. 2 riders circled the pond barriers. Testing, probing. Gideon and Nora waited inside, weapons ready but patient. The riders eventually retreated, wisdom winning over greed. "They'll be back," Gideon said. "Then we'll be ready." Nora made more coffee, strong and black. "Ready as anyone can be." The hearing convened in the courthouse, stuffy with bodies and tension. Neighbors testified. Complaints aired like dirty laundry. When Nora's turn came, she presented facts clean as fresh paper surveys, measurements, precedent law she'd researched. Water laws clear.
she concluded. First in time, first in right, mister. Blake's claim predates the others by 15 years. The chairman nodded thoughtfully. Gideon stood behind her, solid and quiet, his presence saying what words couldn't: partners, whatever that meant in law or life. Unexpectedly, Royce stood to speak. I've seen Blake's water usage for 20 years. He's never taken more than fair. What Mrs. He paused, uncertain of titles. What this lady says is true. Small redemptions, Nora thought. Sometimes they mattered most. The commission ruled in their favor, with provisions for monitoring through the dry season. Not perfect victory, but enough. As they left, several townspeople nodded acknowledgement. Progress. Slow but real. That night, celebration meant extra sugar in the coffee and sitting outside despite the cold. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles but beautiful nonetheless. You did good in there, Gideon said. I freeze up with all those eyes watching. We each do what we're suited for. That's what partnership means. She pulled her shawl tighter. Besides, you standing there looking honest was worth more than words. He laughed, a rare sound. Is that what I looked like? That and ready to fight anyone who disagreed. Good combination. 3 nights later, trouble came calling. The dogs erupted in fury. Shadows moved among the cattle. This time, Gideon's warning shot wasn't enough. The thieves pressed forward, bold with numbers. Nora stepped onto the porch, pistol steady. Jed Carver, I know your walk, even in darkness. County Sheriff has your name. Leave now or leave in chains. A familiar laugh floated back. Old woman playing with guns. This ain't your business. You made it my business when you came uninvited into my home. Her voice carried the weight of every hard year survived. I've faced worse than you with less than I have now. Try me. Movement in the shadows, the thieves conferring, then Jed's voice again, less certain. This ain't over. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. They retreated, taking nothing but leaving behind anger thick as smoke. Gideon touched her shoulder gently. You sure that was wise? Calling him out? Wise or not, it's done. Sometimes you have to show teeth to avoid using them. Dawn came slow and red. In the distance, dust clouds marked riders heading toward town. Within hours, Sheriff Watson arrived with 2 deputies and determination written in tired lines. Got reports from 3 sources about Jed's gang. Judge issued warrants. You folks sit tight, we'll handle this. They set their trap at the canyon mouth, where shadows gave way to law. Nora packed medical supplies along with ammunition. Hope for the best, prepare for the rest, she said. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Shots fired, echoing off stone, shouts and confusion. When dust settled, Jed was in custody, knife and pride both broken. His partner had vanished into the maze of stone. But the gang was finished. At the jail, Jed sneered through bars. Old woman won't testify, too scared. Nora met his eyes steady as sunrise. I've lived longer than your kind of fear. Mr. Carver, see you at trial. The legal proceedings were swift. Evidence presented. Witnesses heard. Justice rough but clear. Jed drew 5 years hard labor. His partner remained free but hunted. The canyon shadows seemed cleaner somehow. Town gossip shifted, grew warmer. That Mrs. Vance knows her business. Blake found himself a smart one. Still talk, but different flavor respect mixing with curiosity. At home, they made a small feast venison stew, fresh bread, preserved peaches from last summer. Gideon spoke rare words of feeling. Couldn't have held this place without you. Couldn't have found a place to hold without you. She served him first. A small gesture meaning large things. Seems we're stuck with each other. Seems so. He smiled into his coffee. Could be worse stuck. That night, Nora wrote in her journal, Fear has a smell sour and sharp, but courage smells like coffee at dawn, fresh bread rising, and the scent of a man who keeps his word.
I'm learning to breathe deeper these days. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon. Inside, two people sat in comfortable silence, having fought their war and won their peace, at least for now. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now hummed with quiet partnership, strong as good fence wire and twice as valuable. The hearing room smelled of wood polish and worry, packed tight with ranchers whose faces showed the strain of drought. The commissioners sat behind a raised table, studying papers like they held the secrets of water itself. Nora's neighbor downstream presented first, voice cracking with desperation. "Blake's damming more than his share. My creek's down to a trickle." Nora stood when called, ledger in hand, spine straight as a surveyor's rod. She spread her maps and measurements across the table, each figure neat as print. January 3rd, water depth at the northern marker 18 inches. January 10th, after the Morrison Ranch extended their channel 14 inches. Her voice carried clear across the room. "Mr. Blake's usage remained constant at 2 inches throughout." She presented photographs sketched in charcoal, showing water levels against marked stakes. The commissioners leaned forward, studying evidence they hadn't expected from a ranch woman. Gideon stood behind her, solid as oak. When asked to speak, his words came spare but true. "I take what I need for my stock, always have. Man who takes more than his share is stealing from his own future." Unexpectedly, Royce Mercer rose from the back benches. "I've known Gideon Blake 20 years, watched him through drought and plenty, never seen him take what wasn't his." He paused. "Adam's apple working. I'd trust his word over my own." The statement hung in the air like unexpected rain. Some debts, Nora thought, got paid in strange currency. Commissioner Harrison, a man who'd seen his share of water wars, studied the evidence. Mrs. Blake. He stumbled over the name. Uncertain. "Vance," she corrected simply. "And yes, I speak for the Blake Ranch in this matter. Your documentation is thorough." "Necessity makes good teachers of us all, sir." The commission deliberated while the room held its breath. Finally, Harrison announced, "Water rights maintained as previously recorded. Blake Ranch usage approved within documented limits. Commission recommends installation of official measuring stations." Outside, neighbors gathered in small knots, some grumbling, others nodding acceptance. Mrs. Henderson approached with something like apology in her eyes. "You made your case fair," she admitted. "Can't argue with numbers." "Numbers don't take sides," Nora replied. "That's why I trust them." On the ride home, Gideon finally spoke. "You did something in there I never could. Made them see sense instead of feeling. You did something too, stood there being yourself. Sometimes that's harder than talking." That evening, he pulled out a wooden box worn smooth with handling. Inside lay papers, seals, and a small brass key. "Been thinking on this a while." He spread the documents out: deed and water rights, tax records. "Want your name on these? Equal partner, legal and proper." Nora's hand stilled on her mending. That's more than business. Gideon." "I know what it is." He met her eyes steady. "Question is, do you want it?" She studied the papers, understanding their weight. In this country, land meant life. Sharing it meant more than any wedding band. "You're offering more than love," she said softly, echoing words from another lifetime. "Offering what I have, all I have." He pushed the pen toward her. "If you'll take it." Her signature flowed neat beside his, ink sinking into paper like promises into earth. When she looked up, his face showed relief and something deeper, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Might want to make it proper in church, too," he added, almost shy. "If you're amenable." "Amenable," she repeated, smiling at their word. "Yes, I believe I am." Late that night, they heard horses approaching. The alarm lines stayed silent. Visitors coming openly. Sheriff Watson appeared with news caught Jed's partner trying to sell stolen cattle 2 counties over. Trials next week. Need you both to testify. At the trial, Jed sat shackled but defiant. His partner, a weasel-faced man named Harlan, looked ready to bolt even in chains. The prosecutor laid out evidence methodical as fence posts. When Nora took the stand, Jed's lawyer tried to shake her. "You're sure it was my client you saw that night, dark night, elderly woman? Failing eyesight, perhaps?" "My sight's good enough to thread a needle by lamplight and see a snake in the grass at noon." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. "I know, mister." Carver's walk, his voice, and his poor choices, all 3 were present that night. Gideon testified brief but damning the knife. The tracks, the pattern of theft. Other ranchers added their pieces. The verdict came swift guilty. 5 years hard labor for Jed, 3 for Harlan. As they let him out, Jed turned back. "This ain't over, old woman." "It is for you," she replied evenly. "Make better choices next time you're free to make them." Outside the courthouse, ranchers who'd lost cattle shook their hands. The community had seen justice done, rough-hewn but real. More important, they'd seen Nora and Gideon stand together against trouble. That counted for something in country where standing alone was common as sagebrush. Back home, they found an unexpected gift on the porch, a sack of seed grain with a note, "For spring planting," from grateful neighbors. No signature, but the gesture spoke volumes. "Things are changing," Gideon observed. "Change comes slow but sure, like water wearing down stone." Nora hefted the sack. "This'll help come planting time." They spent the evening planning where to extend the garden, which fields to plant first. Ordinary talk, but underneath ran a current of something new. Partnership becoming companionship. Companionship deepening towards something neither quite named yet. "Set the date," Gideon asked suddenly. "For planting, for the church part of what we started with those papers." Nora considered. "After spring planting, before summer heat. Give folks time to get used to the idea. They'll talk." "Let them. I'll be too busy being married to listen." He laughed then, full and rich, practical to the bone. "Would you want me any other way?" "No," he said simply. "I wouldn't change a thing." That night, she wrote to her friend back east. "I came west seeking one thing and found another entirely. The man who offered shelter has offered partnership. The house that gave me refuge has become home. I'm learning that the love at our age isn't about passion, it's about patience, shared work, and finding someone who sees you clear and chooses you anyway." The moon rose full over the mountains, silvering the ranch in light soft as promises. In the barn, the milk cow lowed contentedly. The chickens settled with comfortable clucks. Even the land seemed to breathe easier, as if sensing that the people who worked it had found their rhythm together. At the kitchen table, they signed the final papers making the partnership complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, weather, water, the endless work of keeping life going in hard country. But tonight, they had documentation and determination, partnership and possibility. To water rights and doing right, Gideon raised his coffee cup. To standing together when standing alone would be easier. Nora touched her cup to his. Outside, a coyote called across the darkness. Another answered from distant hills. But inside the small circle of lamplight, 2 people sat planning their future with the quiet confidence of those who'd already survived their worst fears and found themselves still standing, still choosing to continue together. The paper between them held both their names now, legal and binding. But the real contract was written in smaller things: shared coffee, divided watches, the simple grace of finding someone who didn't need you to be younger or different, just present and willing to build something lasting in a land that tested everything and everyone who dared call it home. Jed Carver returned like a bad penny, wearing the disguise of respectability, clean-shaven, new clothes, playing the part of an honest fur trader. But wolves could dress in sheep's wool and still be wolves. He arrived with another man, lean and watchful, whose eyes never stopped moving. "Afternoon, folks." Jed's voice carried false warmth like painted sunshine. "Heard you might have some cattle gone astray. Willing to buy them back. No questions asked." Gideon's hand rested casual on his rifle. "No cattle missing here." "That's so well. If any turn up?" Jed's smile showed too many teeth. "We're staying at Murphy's. Fair prices for returned stock." After they left, Nora wrote quick notes to neighboring ranches, warning of strangers buying lost cattle. "He's fishing for inside help," she said, testing who might be willing to look the other way. That night, the barn door stood open, forced but careful. 2 cows gone, vanished like smoke. Tracks led toward the canyon, bold as a signature. Nora documented everything, sketching the boot prints, measuring the stride. "He wants us to know it was him," Gideon said grimly. "Then let's give him what he wants, attention from the law." She prepared a detailed report for Sheriff Watson, complete with drawings and timeline. Evidence built like a wall, brick by careful brick. The next morning brought hail chunks big as thumbnails hammering down, breaking the small window in the kitchen, drumming the roof like war drums. They scrambled to cover what they could. Fighting weather turned violent. When it passed, the damage showed clear. Seedlings beaten flat, young plants shredded. That precious window cracked beyond repair. They patched it with oiled cloth. Another small surrender to the land's harsh moods. "Never ends, does it?" Gideon said, surveying the ruined garden. "Ending's not the point. Continuing is—" Nora was already gathering salvageable plants. "We'll replant. That's what we do." Royce appeared at their gate the next day, bearing unexpected intelligence. "Saw Jed at Murphy's, deep in whiskey and talk. Mentioned your name, something about teaching lessons. Thought you should know." "Why help us?" Nora asked directly. Royce struggled with words. "Made a wrong choice at the station. Can't unmake it, but maybe I can make better ones going forward." "That's all any of us can do," she said simply. "Thank you." Sheriff Watson organized a trap at the canyon's narrow mouth. Nora insisted on coming along with medical supplies and steady nerves. "Someone always gets hurt in these things. Better prepared than sorry." The confrontation came at dawn. Jed and 3 others driving stolen cattle straight into waiting law. Shouts erupted. A shot cracked against stone. In the confusion, Jed tried to bolt, but his horse stumbled, throwing him hard. When the dust settled, 3 men sat in shackles. Jed glared through blood from a split lip. Still defiant, his partner had vanished into the canyon maze, but the gang was broken. "You don't dare testify, old woman." Jed snarled. Nora met his eyes calm as deep water. "Watch me." The trial ran swift and sure. Evidence presented clean the knife. The tracks. Witness testimony from multiple ranches. When Nora took the stand, she spoke clear and factual, letting truth do its own work. "You're certain it was the defendant?" the prosecutor asked. "Certain as sunrise. I don't forget faces that threaten what's mine." Jed drew hard labor, 5 years. His captured partners got 3 each. The missing man stayed missing, but warrants were issued. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Town reactions shifted like wind changing direction. Where once there'd been whispers about that woman at Blake's place, now came nods of respect. She'd stood up to thieves, faced them down, helped bring justice. That counted in a place where law was thin and courage currency. "You're making a name for yourself," Gideon observed as they left town. "Rather make a life than a name," Nora replied. "But if one comes with the other, I won't complain." At home, they found small gifts on the porch: jar of preserves, packet of seeds, horseshoe for luck. No names attached, just quiet acknowledgement from neighbors who'd benefited from their stand. Spring pushed through despite setbacks. They replanted the garden, reinforced the barn, built their life board by board. Evening conversations turned to future plans, expanding the herd, improving water systems, maybe adding a room to the house. Getting ambitious, Gideon teased. Getting comfortable, Nora corrected. There's a difference. One evening, as they worked on ranch accounts together, Gideon pushed a paper across the table. Wrote to Judge Harper about the church ceremony. He can come second Sunday in May if that suits. That suits fine. She studied his face. Having second thoughts? No, having first thoughts. Finally. Took me long enough to get here. Not backing away now. She reached across the table, covered his weathered hand with hers. We both took the long road. Maybe that's why we recognized the destination. That night brought spring rain. Gentle for once instead of violent. They sat on the porch listening to it patter on the roof, watching the thirsty earth drink deep. The ranch that had felt like refuge was becoming something more, a future chosen rather than stumbled into. Never thought I'd do this again, Nora admitted. Thought that part of life was behind me. Maybe it was. This is different. We're different. Gideon shifted his chair closer to hers. I'm not looking for what I had before. Looking for what we can build now. A coyote called in the distance, answered by its mate. The sound that once seemed lonely now spoke of partnership, survival through connection. Even the wild things knew that lesson. I came here running from a humiliation, Nora said softly. Funny how what seems like an ending can be a beginning. Maybe that's the only way beginnings happen, when the endings force us to look in new directions. They sat until the rain stopped and stars emerged between breaking clouds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, weather. Work, the endless demands of wresting life from reluctant land. But tonight they had each other's company, and the quiet certainty of choices made with eyes open and hearts steady. Inside, the replaced window glass caught lamplight, imperfect but functional, like everything else on the ranch. It did its job without pretense, like the two people who'd found each other through accident and chose to stay through decision. The documents making Nora co-owner lay safe in the metal box, but the real security wasn't in paper. It was in the daily choice to face whatever came together rather than alone. In this hard country, that was worth more than any legal seal. To bed, Gideon suggested as the clock chimed late. To bed, Nora agreed. Early day tomorrow. Always an early day tomorrow. But now the early days had purpose beyond mere survival. They had building to do, a life to shape from the raw materials of land, water, and the peculiar blessing of finding partnership when both had thought that chance long past. The house settled around them with familiar creaks. No longer empty, but full of possibility. Two people who'd learned to stand alone were learning something harder, how to stand together. In the end, that might be the greatest courage of all. The drought arrived unseasonable and unwelcome. Clouds hanging empty as broken promises. Grass turned brown before its time. Creek levels dropping daily. The cattle grew gaunt, ribs showing through dusty hides like washboards. Never seen it this dry this early, Gideon said, checking the water markers Nora had installed. Then we'd better plan for worse. She studied their resources with calculating eyes. Rotate the pastures every week instead of monthly. Dig test wells near the house and barn. They spent a week digging, blisters rising despite thick gloves, backs aching from the labor. Each bucket of earth hauled up felt like prayer made physical. When water finally seeped into the hole, muddy and slow but real, Nora actually laughed. Music to my ears, she said, watching the trickle grow. You're easy to please, Gideon teased, but his relief showed plain. Water in a drought, a solid roof in storm, a good man's company, what more does a woman need? They organized watering schedules down to the hour, every drop precious as gold dust. Nora kept meticulous records, tracking usage and planning for the worst while hoping for better. A grass fire sparked near the western ridge, smoke rising like a signal of doom. Wind pushed it eager toward their land. Without discussion, they grabbed wet sacks and shovels, heading to fight what could destroy everything. Backfire! Nora shouted over the crackling roar.
Only way to stop it.
They lit a controlled line, watching anxiously as flames met flames. The technique worked, but smoke filled their lungs. Heat seared their faces. When Gideon stumbled, coughing hard, Nora dragged him back toward the creek.
Breathe shallow, through the cloth,
she instructed, soaking his bandana again. Where'd you learn to fight fires? Missouri. Lost a barn once. Never forgot the lesson. Morning revealed a blackened landscape, desolate as grief, but scattered through the ash, tiny green shoots already pushed upward, life stubborn as the people who worked it. Town opened its emergency stores. Sharing what little they'd saved, Nora contributed from their supplies, earning surprised looks. Can't eat respect, she said, but it helps the bread go down easier. Royce sought them out again, this time with an offer rather than information. I'm heading to my sister's place in Montana. Good water there.
She says, you could come, both of you. Start fresh.
Nora glanced at Gideon, reading his answer in the set of his jaw.
This is our fresh start,
she said gently.
But thank you for thinking of us.
Royce nodded, understanding. Before leaving, he set a bag of drought-resistant seed by their gate. For when the rains come back, they always do. Eventually. Making amends, Gideon asked. Trying to. Man should leave things better than he found them, when he can. Small redemptions, Nora thought. Sometimes they mattered most. The county meeting about water distribution grew heated. Accusations flew like sparks, each rancher desperate to save their own. When voices rose toward violence, Nora stood. Fighting won't make rain. Planning might help us survive until it comes. She presented her proposal: shared wells, rotating access, communal water storage. We sink or swim together out here. Might as well choose swimming. Discussion continued past midnight, but agreement emerged grudging and gradual. People who'd been ready to fight found themselves planning cooperation instead. Necessity. That stern teacher forced lessons in working together. On the ride home, Gideon marveled. You turned a mob into a meeting. Just reminded them what they already knew. Sometimes people need permission to do right. The work began immediately. Ranchers who'd barely spoken for years now labored side by side, digging community wells. Nora coordinated schedules, resolved disputes, kept everyone focused on survival rather than blame. One dawn, she found a dead calf by the depleted creek drought's tax paid in innocent life. She buried it proper, saying words her grandmother had taught her about Earth returning to Earth. Gideon found her there, dirt still under her nails. Hard losses, he said simply. All losses are hard, but we keep going because stopping isn't an option. That evening, he surprised her with a small wooden charm carved from old fence wood. Thought you might like this, for luck, or memory, or just because. The charm was rough but earnest, a tiny house with a heart carved in the door. She held it up to catch the fading light. It's perfect. Like you, he said, then colored at his own boldness. Far from perfect, but trying. Maybe that's enough. It's more than enough, he assured her. It's everything. The drought stretched on, testing every resource and relationship. But the community wells held. The rotation system worked, and slowly, ranchers stopped seeing neighbors as competitors and started seeing them as allies in survival. One evening, clouds gathered, real ones, heavy with promise. The air smelled different, charged with possibility. When the first drops fell, people stood in their yards, faces turned skyward like flowers. It wasn't enough to break the drought, but it was hope made liquid. That night, Nora and Gideon sat on the porch, listening to rain patter on dust. We made it through, she said. This round, there'll be others. Then we'll face those too, together. He took her hand. Work rough meeting work rough, strength recognizing strength. Together, he agreed. In her journal, Nora wrote, Drought teaches hard lessons about water, about neighbors, about what matters when everything unnecessary burns away. We're still here, still standing, still choosing each other every morning. In this hard country, that's its own miracle. The rain continued, gentle but steady. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to remind them that endings weren't permanent, that the earth could be generous as well as cruel, and that two people working together could weather what would break them apart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had rain on the roof, water in the well, and the quiet satisfaction of having survived another test. In the arithmetic of frontier life, that added up to wealth beyond measuring. The charm hung from a nail by the door, catching lamplight and shadow equally. Like everything in their life together, imperfect but cherished, simple but significant, carved from the materials at hand with patience and hope. "Coming in?" Gideon asked as the rain picked up. "In a moment. Just want to hear it a little longer." He settled beside her, understanding. Some things needed witnessing, first rain after drought, first green after fire, first trust after betrayal. They sat together, no longer waiting for their lives to begin but living them fully, one careful day at a time. Autumn arrived with its promise of harvest and accounting. The cattle had gained weight despite the hard summer. Grass returned to the pastures, and the work of their hands showed in every mended fence and filled storage bin. The county inspector returned for the water rights review, carrying his official ledger like scripture. Nora met him with her own records, months of measurements, rainfall data, distribution logs that proved their compliance down to the gallon. "Most thorough documentation I've seen," he admitted, comparing her figures to his own. "Everything matches. Water usage well within legal limits." The official's seal on their papers felt like vindication for every sleepless night spent watching the wells, every careful calculation that stretched resources without breaking laws or neighbors' trust. The wedding day approached quiet as morning. Nora altered her good dress, adding pearl buttons from her mother's sewing box. Gideon borrowed a proper coat from the minister, polished his boots until they showed reflection. "Nervous?" she asked the night before, finding him restless by the barn. "Not nervous, just thinking how strange life is. If Royce hadn't—" He stopped, shaking his head. "No use traveling that road." "No use at all. We're here now. That's what matters." The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of neighbors who'd become something like friends. The church smelled of beeswax and old wood. Sunlight slanted through plain glass windows, illuminating dust motes like tiny blessings. They walked the aisle alone, neither given nor taken, but choosing. The minister's words rolled over them familiar as rain. "Do you take this woman?" "I took her the day she arrived," Gideon said, then colored at his break from script. "I mean, yes, I do." Laughter rippled through the small congregation, not mockery, but warmth. These people understood unconventional paths to conventional endings. "And do you take this man?" the minister continued, smiling now. "I do, have done. We'll keep doing." Nora's voice carried clear and certain. The ring was Gideon's mother's, sized to fit. No flourish, no fuss. Just a circle of gold, worn thin by years but holding strong. Like everything else in their life together, tested by time but enduring. One bell toll marked the union official. No rice thrown, no big celebration. Just nods from neighbors, a handshake from the minister, and two names joined in the church register as they'd already been joined in deed and daily life. The small reception happened in the churchyard. Cornbread, cold beef, coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. Mrs. Henderson, who'd once whispered behind her fan, now pressed Nora's hand warmly. "You've been good for him," she said. "Good for all of us. Really, showing us how to pull together." Even Royce appeared briefly, hat in hand at the edge of the gathering. When he approached to offer congratulations, Gideon shook his hand, firm but brief forgiveness given but distance maintained. "You found what you were looking for," Royce said to Nora. "Found what I wasn't looking for," she corrected. Sometimes that's better. At home, the marriage certificate joined the land papers in the metal box. Nora touched both documents lightly, paper promises backed by daily practice. Feels different, Gideon asked. Feels the same, but more official. Like getting a deed for land you've already been working. That's about right. He agreed, understanding her practical poetry. The next morning dawned no different than hundreds before chores waiting. Coffee needed. Life demanding attention. But Nora pinned a small white ribbon to the door, an old tradition from her grandmother, marking joy in a place that had known struggle. What's that for? Gideon asked. To remember that some days are worth marking, even when they lead to ordinary mornings. He kissed her then, unexpected in the doorway with the sun rising behind them. Not passionate, but profound acknowledgement of choices made and kept. Days resumed their rhythm. The prejudices that had followed Nora's arrival faded like morning frost, replaced by the grudging respect earned through drought and trial. When people spoke of the Blakes now, they meant both of them. One evening, sorting through correspondence, Nora found a letter from back east. Her friend wrote of city troubles, society gossip, the narrow life Nora had fled. She read it aloud to Gideon, both of them marveling at how foreign that world seemed now. Any regrets? He asked. About leaving. She folded the letter carefully. Only that I didn't leave sooner. About ending up here with me. She looked around the simple room, rough furniture, patched windows, a life built from necessity and determination. Then at him weathered, steady, hers. This is where I was meant to be, just took me longer to find it. In her journal that night, she wrote, Happiness isn't grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's a well-mended fence, water enough for the stock, and someone who sees you clear-eyed and chooses you anyway. It's building something together that neither could manage alone. Outside, the first frost warnings whispered through the grass. Winter would come again with its tests and trials, but the house stood ready wood-stacked, supplies laid in, 2 people prepared to face whatever came. Gideon joined her at the table, bringing the account books. They worked through the numbers together, planning for spring, allowing for setbacks, building dreams on the foundation of practical preparation. We did well this year, he said, closing the ledger. We survived. In this country, that counts as doing well. More than survived. We thrived. Look at us married, partnered, respected. Not bad for a woman left at the station and a man too stubborn to quit trying. She smiled at that, remembering the morning that had brought her here cold, abandoned, carrying hurt like luggage. Now she sat in her own home, at her own table, with her own husband discussing their own future. Not bad at all, she agreed. The clock chimed late, time for bed. For rest before another day of work and weather and small satisfactions. They moved through their evening routines with the ease of long practice become fresh commitment. Coming, Gideon asked from the bedroom doorway. In a moment. She stood at the window, looking out at the land that had tested them, taught them, brought them together. The moon silvered the fence lines they'd mended, the well they'd dug, the life they'd built from stubbornness and grace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, not because fate had placed her here, but because she'd chosen it, worked for it, earned it through every blister and budget and brave moment. The woman who'd stepped off the train alone would barely recognize the woman stepping away from the window now. But Nora recognized herself perfectly stronger for the breaking, richer for the losing, whole for the finding. She joined her husband, leaving the lamp burning low. Its light caught on the wooden charm by the door, on the white ribbon still pinned there, on all the small markers of a life not just survived but celebrated. Outside, coyotes sang to the stars. Inside, 2 people who'd found each other late but not too late settled into sleep, into peace, into the particular contentment of those who know tomorrow's work and welcome it. Winter returned to the valley, but this time it met a different household. Snow still piled against the walls. Wind still rattled the windows. But inside, warmth held steady not just from the stove, but from the life built within these walls. The town had changed its tune gradually. Where once whispers followed Nora's steps, now came nods of acknowledgement. At the general store, women included her in their careful conversations about preserving meat and predicting weather. "Your husband's lucky." "Mrs." Morrison said one afternoon, weighing out flour, "finding a woman who knows her mind and speaks it clear." "We're both lucky," Nora replied, "finding each other when we'd stopped looking." The winter social drew fewer stares this year. Young couples still commanded the dance floor, but a handful of older pairs joined them as if Nora and Gideon had given permission for love to bloom past its expected season. Word came that Royce had settled well in Montana, even found companionship with a widow near his sister's ranch. The news brought no jealousy, only a quiet satisfaction that broken paths could lead to better destinations for everyone involved. "Seems he found what he was really looking for," Gideon observed. "Seems we all did. Just took some wandering to get there." One morning brought unexpected bounty. The calf born during the drought had grown strong, and its mother gave rich milk. Small victories. But in ranch life, small victories accumulated like snow into something substantial. Nora expanded her teaching, showing 3 local women basic accounting and letter writing. The Sunday sessions became as regular as church. Knowledge passed like recipes between those hungry to learn. "Why do this?" young Sarah Henderson asked, struggling with her letters. "Because depending only on others to read and figure leaves you vulnerable. Better to stand on your own understanding." Gideon built a small addition to the barn shelter for the goats Nora had started keeping again. They watched the animals test their boundaries, eating everything except, as memory served, the Bible and fence posts. "Still true." Nora laughed as one tried to nibble her apron. "Some things never change." "Some things shouldn't," Gideon replied, watching her tend the small herd with practiced ease. A late blizzard tested their preparedness. 3 days of white blindness. Wind screaming like all the demons of doubt. But their wood stayed stacked, their animals sheltered, their partnership solid as the walls around them. When it cleared, they emerged to a world transformed but manageable. Together they dug paths, checked stock, repaired what wind had torn. The work felt lighter shared, even as their bodies felt the weight of accumulated years. "Getting older," Gideon admitted, rubbing his back after moving feed sacks. "Getting wiser," Nora corrected. "Learning to work smarter instead of just harder." Spring's arrival brought its own gifts. The well they dug during drought now ran clear and strong. Seeds planted in hope showed green shoots of promise. The land that had tested them now yielded to their knowledge. At the church, Minister Harper asked them to speak to a young couple facing hard times. They sat with the pair, sharing not advice but experience how drought teaches patience, how thieves teach vigilance, how loss teaches what really matters. "But how do you keep going when everything seems against you?" the young wife asked, tears threatening. "You take the next step," Nora said simply. "Then the next, eventually, you look back and see you've traveled farther than you thought possible." One evening, sorting through Gideon's mother's things, they found her journal. Pages yellow with age held a story not unlike their own struggle. Loss, unexpected love, quiet triumph. "She would have liked you," Gideon said again, stronger this time. "I think I would have liked her too." Strong women recognize each other, even across time. The journal joined their important papers, another link in the chain of stories that made a place home. History wasn't just in documents, but in the lives lived within these walls. Summer brought a letter that made Nora pause. Her friend from the East had died, leaving her a small inheritance. Not much by city standards, but enough to make improvements: a new well pump, better fencing, glass to replace the patched window properly. "It's yours to decide," Gideon said when she showed him. "Ours," she corrected. "Everything is ours now."
They invested carefully in the land, in the community. In the future, they were building one season at a time. The new pump sang as it worked, water flowing easier than ever before. The anniversary of Nora's arrival passed with little fanfare, just a quiet acknowledgement over morning coffee of how far they'd traveled from that cold morning at the station. "Best thing that ever happened, you stepping off that train," Gideon said. "Best thing that happened was you offering shelter to a stranger." "Wasn't a stranger, just hadn't met you yet." She smiled at that, understanding blooming like their garden. Some connections existed before meeting, waiting for the right moment to manifest. In her final journal entry for the year, Nora wrote, "I came west seeking one kind of security and found another entirely, not the safety of youth or beauty or others' approval, but the security of knowing who you are, what you can endure, and who stands beside you." The woman at the station thought she needed rescuing. The woman at this table knows she rescued herself and found a partner worthy of the journey. Evening fell soft as worn cotton. They sat on the porch, watching shadows stretch across land they'd earned through sweat and stubbornness. The coyotes started their nightly chorus, but the sound no longer spoke of loneliness, just wildness existing alongside domesticity, each in its place. "Good day," Gideon asked, as he did every evening. "Good day," she confirmed, as she always did. But tonight she added, "Good life." "That too," he agreed, taking her hand with the same care he'd shown that first night, as if she were precious but not fragile, valued but not possessed. The stars emerged one by one, mapping out possibilities across the wide Wyoming sky. Beneath them, two people who'd thought their stories mostly written discovered whole chapters yet to come. Not the dramatic tales of youth, but the deeper narrative of lives fully lived, chosen daily, celebrated in small moments and steady love. Tomorrow would dawn with its usual demands: animals to tend, fences to check, life to be wrestled from reluctant earth. But tonight held its own completion, its own compass pointing toward home, not a place but a person, not a destination but a continuing journey. The lamp burned steady in the window, beacon and blessing both. Inside, two people prepared for rest, for another day, for whatever came next. They'd learned the secret the frontier taught those strong enough to listen. Happiness wasn't about finding perfect circumstances, but about choosing to build something worthwhile wherever you landed. And they had built well a life sturdy as good fence posts, precious as water in drought, enduring as the mountains that watched over their valley. A love story written not in grand gestures, but in daily choices, each one saying yes to today, to tomorrow, to each other. The coyotes sang, the wind whispered, and in a small ranch house in Wyoming, two people who'd found each other late but not too late settled into sleep, into peace, into the particular joy of those who know that home isn't where you start, but where you choose to stand and stay. Thank you for listening to this story of love found late, but not too late in the Wild West. If you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance and resilience, please let us know where you're listening from. We love connecting with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Nora and Gideon's journey in the comments below. What touched your heart in their story?